And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Coca-Cola Space Science Center, Studio North, where we are here with our group and waiting for the launch of the Crew Dragon 2 demo. Our great panel has returned. So I'll give you a little bit of a weather briefing after we introduce our crowd here. So starting from our top left-hand side is from Marshall Space Flight Center, who is the payload controller, Matt Bartow. How you doing, Matt? I totally said
Great to be here, Mike. Thanks for
totally
having
told them
us.
they wouldn't have to talk, and then I asked Matt a question. How did that go? All right, after
It's all
that, we
right.
have Dr. Sean Cruzen, the executive director of the Coca-Cola Space Science Center. After Dr. Cruzen, we have Scott Norman, our CLC director, Challenger Learning Center director here at the Coca-Cola Space Science Center. Next up, Cameron McCarty, not McCarthy, if some of you are logging in again. Cameron is another payload controller there at Marshall Space Flight Center. Right after Cameron is going to be science educator here at the Coca-Cola Space Science Center, Sarah Newpin. Sarah has joined us today. Next to Sarah is John Hood, a PhD candidate from Vanderbilt University. John. Next to that is Zach Coker. Zach is you're going to have to help me here. It's the Life Sciences Glove Box controller.
Yeah.
Oh, I got it right. Yes. Zach is also out at Marshall Space Flight Center. We'll probably have to ask Zach a little bit later about what exactly that is. And then Cheryl Coker, who is a payload controller along with Cameron and Matt there at Marshall Space Flight Center. So that is our panel for now. We may have some other people coming in a little bit later, going in and out. To give you a little bit of an update, we are now at T-minus 1 hour and 20 minutes into launch time. Our launch time, of course, is at 3:22 p.m. All right. I'm going to be quiet just for a minute. We have some activity going on in what's called the countdown loop. They're going to be doing a launch countdown poll, which means that they're going to go through different stations and go for a go, no go. Go meaning they are okay for launch. No go being that, well, there's something that they're looking at. So when they start that, I'll pause for a minute and listen to that. One of the main concerns they're looking at today is obviously weather. If you can take a look, you can see those clouds building up. There are some storms brewing in the area. They're expecting it to clear out by about, 2:30, ladies and gentlemen? So hopefully by then they'll be able to improve their chances a little bit. It is only a 50-50 chance. So they're either going to go or they're not going to go today. And of course, when we take our attention over to the countdown loop, what do? They become quiet. All right. While we're waiting for that to start, we did have a question come in from our accounts before when we tried on Wednesday and the launch was scrubbed for weather. But one of the questions that we had from our audience, ladies and gentlemen, was what is an instantaneous launch? What does that mean? And I think, Cameron, I'm going to give this question to you. What is an instantaneous launch?
Sure. So an instantaneous launch is a launch window that has to happen right as scheduled. With a lot of the shuttle launches, there were time on either side of the launch where they could delay the launch right at the last second and then wait about 20 minutes or so and then launch when the weather cleared. With the Falcon 9 and the Crew Dragon, they have an instantaneous launch window, which means that right at 3:22, they have to launch, or 4:22, I guess it's central, right? But they have to launch right then. What they're doing is they're actually catching up to the International Space Station that's flying around in space, and it's flying around the Earth, and it has different orbital trajectories. And so if you wait to launch, that orbit could go off, and you could miss the space station. The other reason is they've got the Falcon 9 super cools their fuel on board, and so since they fuel the rocket with the astronauts on board, they could lose too much fuel, and that fuel could warm up, and they wouldn't be able to launch with the right amount of fuel.
Okay. So basically, it's really complicated way of saying that they have to go right now.
Exactly.
Yes. Hey, so we've got a couple other questions coming in. This one is from Sebastian Collips, and he's 4 years old. And he asked this. He says, what are the tower things next to the rocket ship that knock over? So talking a little bit about the strong back there. And are there ropes attached to the rocket ship to hold it up? Basically, what are those things that are on the rocket ship? Scott, would you like to answer about those ropes or
Well,
cables?
now, my understanding is that those are for lightning protection to ground the lightning towers in case there's lightning in the area. I mean, you think about they're in Florida, it could be a lot of rough weather. And so they don't want the rocket or the Dragon capsule being hit by lightning. So you've got these towers, and then you've got the lines down to the ground to dissipate any kind of lightning discharge.
What about the towers? What's the towers that knock over that kind of go off to the side? What's that there for? Anybody know what the strongback's for used?
So the strongback is actually used. They actually transport the rocket from the hangar that's further down the ramp at Pad 39A. They actually basically have a set of basically train wheels and rails. They roll it up the side of the pad, and then it lifts it into the vertical position. So it allows a lot of flexibility. They can lower the rocket down horizontally if they need to work on it, or they can lift it back up vertically. And there are a lot of umbilicals that connect the vehicle to the ground. So basically, at the moment, the vehicle's hardwired, so they can control things from the ground. And as the rocket lifts off, just before the rocket lifts off, you'll see that tower kind of move back. The strong back will lean back. Not sure how many degrees it does, but basically to get out of the way of the rocket. And as the rocket lifts off, those umbilicals detach. And the rocket's fully self-sufficient around the T-minus 30-second time period.
So, so when it goes back up, do they lift it to? You said they kind of take it out on his back. When do they lift it and go to vertical? Is that there at the pad, or do they do it before?
So that's at the pad. So they'll roll it out horizontally, basically like a giant train, like a big train car, much like the Soyuz does in Russia. It'll roll out horizontally on its side. They'll get up to the launch pad, and then they'll raise it up with some really large hydraulic pistons, push it up to the vertical position where it is sitting now.
So, Mr. Scott, this is probably a question for you. Some people have seen maybe space shuttle launches before, and this is obviously different than the space shuttle. What are the differences between the actual space shuttle and the Dragon capsule that they're going to be launching today?
Sure. Well, really, the Dragon capsule is kind of a return to kind of the past, in the sense that before the shuttle, all of our astronauts rode on top of the rocket in a capsule design that came back on a heat shield and splashed down in the ocean, came down on parachutes. And so that's kind of a return to what we had in the 60s and 70s. When the shuttle came along, first flight in April of 1981 with the Columbia, it was the first winged vehicle to go into orbit. And it had a different type of heat shield, a reusable heat shield. It had the tiles. It landed on a runway as opposed to coming down on parachutes, and certainly did not splash down to the ocean. So it was just a very different vehicle. It used liquid hydrogen, liquid oxygen for propellants, had solid rocket boosters. The Falcon 9 rocket, it's propelled by RP-1 fuel and liquid oxygen, super cold liquid oxygen for the oxidizer. And the astronauts right up top in the Dragon capsule. And this capsule is designed to come back to Earth and splash down in the ocean, comes down on parachutes. And the astronauts actually have an escape mechanism. They actually have a way to get out, which unfortunately the shuttle did not have. If something should go wrong during the flight, that capsule could actually separate from the top of the rocket, and the parachutes would deploy and the astronauts would splash down in the ocean. So that's one big difference between the Dragon capsule and the way that the shuttle vehicle was designed to use. Another thing is that the Falcon 9 rocket has 9 engines, and that hence the 9 in Falcon 9. And the shuttle only had 3 main engines, and as well as the solid rocket boosters. So it's really kind of a return to the past, but highly updated. It's a capsule for the 21st century. The Dragon capsule has touch screens. So if you look inside of it, it looks very different from the old Apollo or Gemini capsules that had a lot of dials and switches. This looks much more modern. Again, it's a capsule for the 21st century. So the design philosophy may be similar to the old 60s and 70s, but it's got modern technology inside of it.
Right. One of those technologies is increased electronics, and the last capsule that humans went on was the Apollo missions, and with the Saturn V, and Apollo 12 had a little incidents with weather, didn't they?
Yeah. Yes, the Apollo 12 capsule, the Apollo 12 mission, was struck by lightning. That was in November 1969, so shortly after liftoff. They launched in a thunderstorm, which we will not see happening today. And Commander Pete Conrad, it was an all-Navy crew. He was former Navy, and he said that he was happy to do the all-weather testing for them. But he said after they got struck by lightning, he regretted saying that. But they did launch in a lightning storm and a storm, and the vehicle was hit twice by lightning. It caused the guidance platform to go out, and fortunately, they were able to reset everything and get everything working properly, and they were able to continue the mission, which sounds amazing. You would think after being hit by lightning, the Saturn V would not be able to continue, but it was such a robust vehicle, and the astronauts thought quickly. They knew what to do, what switches to throw, and they were able to continue the mission and land on the moon, and it was the second moon landing, Apollo 12 in November 1969.
All right. Well, speaking of which, you're right. We aren't going to be launching today if there are thunderstorms. And let me pull up. I just have the weather radar here, and this was taken just a few minutes ago. You can see there are thunderstorms in the area. Right in the center where that red is a little bit right outside the launch area. So they're expecting these showers to kind of go through and pass through, hopefully by launch time. We'll be keeping an eye on it, and I'll be bringing back the satellite every once in a while just for us to double check. But onto another subject here. We have actually one of our guests has a question here, Sarah.
Hey, I just have a kind of talking about the space shuttles were reusable. Looking at the Falcon 9, how much of it is going to return back to Earth? And how would that happen? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So, Matt, you have that answer? Or Dr. Cruzen?
I'll let Matt. I'll default to Matt here.
Sorry, it took a second for me to catch up with the audio. Yeah, so the Falcon 9 rocket itself, I'm sure people have seen SpaceX launches before. They're made to be as reusable as possible. So the bottom portion of the rocket is going to come back down and land. And the capsule with the astronauts, once it goes up to the International Space Station, it will also be reusable. So it's going to be coming back down safely with the astronauts and eventually be reused as well. So this is basically 100% reusable.
Nice. Do you happen to know how many times they can reuse these? I don't know what the human rated, how many times they're going to be able to allow them to use that, actually.
From what I've heard, the Block 5s, I think the most one's been reused so far is 5 or 6 launches. I think it's 5 launches. And then after that, they've been using them for missions that they can't land the first stage on, simply because they have too much downward velocity downrange. So at that point, they kind of overshoot any limit that they could have. Of course, I still love you, the drone ship that they land on.
Cool.
So I think right now the most they've relaunched a single booster is 5 times.
All right, listening to the countdown loop right now. They're getting that closer to that go no go decision here. I kind of thought they were going to do it there. That's why I turned the audio on. Yeah. This is all part of the fun of being a launch. Is sometimes things take a little bit at different times. What's going on there? So while we're listening for that, let's go on to another question. And this is kind of up for everybody here. If you've been to a launch, raise your hand, your physical hand. Yeah, I can add mine to that too. John, didn't you go to Osiris Rex?
I did not. I missed that one.
Oh my goodness.
We'll have to go to the next one, John.
Yeah. We're all gonna.
Yeah, we definitely do.
Now.
So, so for those of you that have been to a launch, what was your favorite moment or experience of that? And I'll kind of go around the horn here, with the first one being Matt.
Hey, yeah, so I went to the final shuttle launch of Endeavour. Beautiful launch. It was a relatively cloudy day, but they still pulled off the launch anyway. The most surprising aspect of the launch is just how loud it is. Everyone always tells you how loud the launches are, how the rocket engines cause vibrations in the air that you can feel in your chest. And it's easy to say that, but it's something completely different to experience it. It was fantastic.
So, Scott, what was your favorite? Now, I know you've been to several launches, so what was your favorite one?
Yeah, I've done 2. I saw one in 1991, and then I saw the last mission, STS-135, which was the final shuttle flight. It was Atlantis. And that one, I was much closer for the second launch. I was at the Kennedy Space Center, and I was near the countdown clock in the press area, which is about as close as they will let you get if you're not actually on the shuttle. And the sound, it's just to echo what Matt was saying, that the sound is, seeing it on TV doesn't do it justice. And just to see it actually go up in person, to be there was just a experience of a lifetime. It's something, once you see something like that, you'll never forget it.
Yeah. I can vouch that the feeling of it, you really feel it as you go through. So before we go on to Zach, I wanted to give you a little update on our weather. Looking at people that are actually there in Florida, there are 3 rules right now that they're looking at. That they have these, they call them launch commit criteria, or fancy word to saying, what rules are we going to follow when we launch? Well, 3 of the weather ones that they were looking at was flight through participation. So basically, they don't want to fly through rain. A cumulus cloud. So cumulus clouds can be thunderstorms, where thunderstorms come from, if you kind of remember your cloud types. And the other one is the surface electric field. How likely are we to have a lightning strike at or near the pad, or how likely is the rocket going to be acting to create its own lightning as it goes? Well, some good news. So just got an update that the surface electric fields, that lightning, just went from red to green. The only weather flight rule they're looking at now are those thunderstorm clouds that we see in the area. Now, if those can clear to a certain distance, weather will actually turn from red to green, and we will actually have everything go for launch. So keep your fingers crossed. We're going out there. And so to continue on the favorite kind of flight and experience, Zach, what about you?
Yeah, so I was with Matt and Cheryl for STS-134, final flight of Endeavour. It was actually the second time I saw Endeavour fly. And, can't reiterate it enough. The sound is incredible, but another thing that stood out was how bright it was. I mean, it's like staring at the sun. You don't realize just how bright, because especially when you're looking at it on a television screen or something like that, the camera compensates for the brightness, so it dims everything down. But I mean, it's basically like looking at a little sun. You almost can't see the shuttle itself because of how bright it is. But yes, it was certainly a once in a lifetime thing that I'll never forget, and it's also something that you kind of yearn for after you've seen it once. You want to experience it again. I know when I was the director of the planetarium out in West Texas, I actually edited a video together of the 134 launch and played it in our planetarium for a bunch of the children that would come in. And I did my absolute best to make it sound as close as I could. So I'd ramp the bass up as loud as I possibly could and drive everybody nuts around the building because the whole building would shake. And it still didn't match up to what it was like in person. So yeah, it was something spectacular that's really hard to describe with words.
Cameron?
So I can't reiterate enough all of what everybody else has said. I would say my best description for it is when you're in a movie theater or an IMAX theater and you're watching some emotional scene and the music ramps up and you get that feeling in your stomach of just, wow, this is a really cool experience.
Dragon, SpaceX, we're at T-minus 1 hour. You are go for section 6. When ready, report go for launch.
We'll put it work.
Yep, so they're continuing on here. So here, before we go on to Cheryl, I want to remind everyone, I want to welcome everybody again to our webcast here. We are awaiting the launch of the SpaceX Crew Dragon, one of the first commercial launches, or the first commercial launch of astronauts to the International Space Station. For those of you that are fans of the Science Center, or maybe don't know about us, don't forget you can actually check out videos, stories, and
SpaceX Dragon in 6.4. Bob and I are go for launch.
All right, that's good news too.
Copy, go for launch, and next up will be go to GoPro at T-minus 45.
All right, and so you can actually watch our videos, articles, activities, and more from your CCSSC family only at www.ccsssc.org. That's Meteor Moments there. That will have highlights of our webcast and also, as time permits, highlights from student interviews and things like that, much like the interviews we did on last Wednesday, where many of you were on there. So we're answering the question now of what it's actually like to experience a launch, and some of our panelists here have been to launches, and so we're getting that. And so let's go on here to Cheryl Coker. Cheryl, what was your favorite launch, and kind of what was the favorite part of that experience?
My favorite launch was Endeavor's final launch at STS-134, because that was the only launch I ever saw. But I got to experience that with Matt and Zach, and I think watching a shuttle launch, there's something just very majestic about it. And it's so powerful and just gorgeous to see. But with Endeavor, Matt mentioned that we had some cloud coverage. And so Endeavor launched and she went through the clouds, and we were like, that's awesome. It was cool, but man, she's gone. We can't see her anymore. And then there was just this hole right above us where there were no clouds. And we got to watch her go all the way up to the SRB separation, and basically until you just couldn't see her anymore. And it was an amazing surprise and just such a cool experience, because most other people did not get to see that. It was only like where we were sitting that we got to see it.
Yeah, I remember that was extremely cool. And it was just kind of one of those that kind of took your breath away, because you're like, oh, there it is again. And it was just this very small bright dot on the in the sky on that. Dr. Cruzen, what about you?
You know, Mike, I think I've seen several launches, and I think one of the things that is the most interesting to me is, well, maybe I'll break it up into two parts. So first of all, you have to remember that you're watching from anywhere from 3.5 to 5 miles away. And so unless you're watching, you have to keep your eyes on the launch site, right? Unless you're actually watching right where the rocket's going to launch, if you wait for the sound before you look, you're actually going to miss the launch, right? So you're going to see it move, and then you're going to hear it much later. And so the very visceral reactions to the sound waves are actually something that you're experiencing after you already see the rocket lift off and move upward, right? So there's that one thing that you have to kind of pay attention to. Your eyes have to be kind of locked on the thing to watch it go up, and then later you're going to get that sound experience. Yeah. Second thing I'll say is exactly what Zach said. That is the thing that always impressed me the most, is you don't realize until you see a launch in person just how bright that plume is. You see this picture back behind me of the space shuttle, right there, right where the hottest gases are coming out of the main engine. You know, you see pictures like this and you say, well, yeah, that's very bright, but it's actually, I mean, I've never stared into a welder's torch, but it almost has that feeling like it's something you shouldn't be looking at because it's so intensely bright. And that's a part of the power and the energy being generated by those rocket engines, that unless you're there in person, you'll never get to experience that through a camera lens, for exactly the reasons that Zach said. The camera's going to oversaturate, it's just going to block out. It has a limited dynamic range on what it can pick up, but your eye has a much greater dynamic range, and you really get a sense of, oh my goodness, that is a crazy amount of energy being generated in that little tiny location right there where those gases are coming out of the rocket chamber, the engine chambers of the rocket. So I've experienced that with Space Shuttle a couple of times. I got to experience it with a couple of other launches of smaller rockets. Just because they're smaller than Space Shuttle does not mean they're not still generating one whale amount of energy right there where those gases are coming out of the engine chamber. So those are the kind of visceral things that I remember. And I remember all the sound too. So the folks that describe the sound thump in your chest, you get that. It's more than just subwoofer at that point. It's some kind of a rumble that you're just not familiar with in your daily life. Really, yeah. It's really, really different. So those are the great things. And maybe I'll throw in one last thing, because I mean, this is what I think about and this is what I do. How inspirational it is to see that launch, right? When you're there in person and you get to actually see this massive machine generating all that energy, carrying human beings or even robotic payloads to space, it gave me an emotional sense, a reaction that is just unlike pretty much anything else I've ever seen in person. I mean, you compare it to what, football games or rock concerts or any of the kinds of things you go and experience in life. A launch like that is so different, so much more powerful, that it really, in me personally, gave a very evocative, inspirational, emotional response. Very cool stuff.
Yeah. We want to introduce our next person, because Christian wasn't here in the very beginning, but he's joined us now. Want to introduce Christian Cruzen, who is a test engineer out of Jacobs Engineering out at Johnson Space Flight Center. So while our other guests have been in other locations of Marshall Space Flight Center, and then John in Chicago there, Christian is actually based out of Houston, Texas. Christian, the question is if you had a launch experience, kind of what was your favorite launch experience, and what did you most remember about that?
Yeah, certainly I'll talk about that. So I've been to 2 launches, but only 1 shuttle launch. And so I went to STS-135, and so we had planned to go to the original last shuttle launch, but that one got delayed for whatever reason, and then they rescheduled, and they had a second launch there in July of 2011. So I went and watched STS-135 launch. That launch was, I mean, very similar to everything that people have been saying, just all of the feeling of actually being there and experiencing that. I'll talk about it from just a perspective of what it was like to see the last shuttle go up. For me, it's kind of unfortunate because it's a very bittersweet thing. You're excited that, you know, we've had this incredible journey with all of these space shuttles and been able to launch multiple components of the International Space Station to put them in orbit and build this floating platform that we've now been using for 20 years. But having said that, you know, it's sad too because that was the very final one. And so in kind of a metaphorical, you know, sense, it went up and disappeared into the clouds. And so, you know, you're expecting to try and experience all these different, you know, sights and sounds that people, you know, have been talking about here today. And, you know, you experience all that in about 15 seconds and then it just kind of is over for, you know, for us it was. And so it kind of, you know, it was kind of like, wow, that was a lot. It was amazing, you know, all the different aspects of it, the brightness and the sound and just the distance that, you know, even over that distance, the amount of energy that you could feel. But it, you know, just it being over is kind of like, wow, I really am sad that I hadn't had the chance to go down and witness a launch before. And now I'm not going to get the chance, maybe ever at that point, I was thinking, right? And so today is really exciting for me. You know, I have some friends who are down at the Cape. They're actually getting to experience the launch in person, which is, you know, awesome. I'm sure they're practicing social distancing. I'm hoping they're practicing social distancing, but you know, it's really cool to be able to watch that for myself today and see Americans launch from Kennedy Space Center again. It's just an incredible thing. So that's kind of my experience with STS-135. And it was very bittersweet.
I'm going to break in here just momentarily. I think Mike is listening to the feed. I think we might be having a weather update here shortly. But for those of you who are just joining us, this is the Coca-Cola Space Science Center at Columbus State University, and we're being joined here. A few of us are on staff, but we're being joined by our panel of experts here. And our panel of experts are in the space industry. Most of them are working at the Marshall Space Flight Center, one working at the Johnson Space Center, one working out at the Kavli Institute for Cosmological Astrophysics out there at the University of Chicago. That'd be John. He's got a picture up behind him. That's the South Pole Telescope. Just a few months ago, John got to actually make a trek down to the South Pole, not just Antarctica, but all the way to the South Pole to do some work and some experiments on that telescope down there. So, John, that's a really great experience. We're glad you got to do that. But for those of you just joining us, this is just a watch party. These are all former students of ours who used to be interns at Space Science Center, and now they're going off and doing all kinds of amazing things in the space industry. We asked them if they wanted to just come back and hang out with us, make some popcorn, watch the launch together, and we're all sharing that with you. So that's what we're doing right here. And as you can see, we're waiting to see what's going to take place with the Dragon capsule. The view I'm seeing right now, the sky looks a little bit sunnier. So we're hoping that
Dr.
weather
C,
is going to be favorable.
I'm hearing my other ear. They just gave a weather is go for the crew.
Oh, okay. So Cameron just updated us. They gave a weather is go from the Cape. That's fantastic. And so wow. Hey, we may get to see this thing launch here today, ladies and gentlemen. We are down to much less than an hour away from launch. Weather looking good. I think weather, by and large, was the last factor. You know, things can come up at the last second. We know any veteran of watching launches knows that things can go wrong at the last minute, and they kind of put the halts on things. So we're not completely out of the woods yet for a launch, but getting weather to be a clear point, which Cameron just told us there, is a really important factor being able to be ready to get this thing up into space. Now, folks, what you're seeing today, you're seeing history. We haven't launched Americans from American soil in nearly a decade. And that's the largest gap that we've had of time from launching American astronauts from American soil since anybody ever went to space. So this is the longest gap in the history of NASA. And today could be the day that we're ending that launch gap and actually putting Americans back into space from an American rocket on American launch pads at the good old Kennedy Space Center. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you've never gotten to go down and visit the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Center and see the launch facilities down there and see the Saturn V and the Shuttle Atlantis and all the things that are on display down there, I would highly encourage you to make a trip down there. Take the kids down. If you can time it with a launch, even better, because then you can see all the one of the greatest museums anywhere in America at the Kennedy Space Center, and then also experience one of these live launches like you've heard the folks talking about here. I would highly encourage you to do that. So, but anyway, as we're approaching here, we're getting ready to have an update. I think Mike Johnson, Mike, you've been listening to the loops. What do you know?
Yes. So they just announced that they are go for launch. They are go for propellant load, which means they are going to start loading the fuel on the rocket. This is this gets to the portion where they're really careful because there are astronauts on board. And also, Cameron, you've had your hand up. You said you had something you wanted to say.
I think that was from a while ago. I was talking about just the craziness of watching a launch and what makes it special. And the one thing I forgot to mention is I think the speed is really, we keep talking about the sound and the light, but a lot of times when you see launches on video, they're in slow motion. You've got a camera that's tracking it, super close up from a long way away, and you really lose just how fast this is going. Like Christian was talking about when he was talking about the launch, just how quick it goes. I mean, that rocket's going, it has to get up to 17,500 miles per hour, and it just rockets away, and it's absolutely incredible at just how fast that thing is going and how powerful it is.
All right, here we go with the
I'm not sure if Mike is listening to loop audio. Did he drop out for the rest of you two?
Should be having some loop audio coming your way.
I don't think it's going through,
not.
Mike.
It's not coming through the webcast.
Okay.
I think.
What they were announcing there is that launch was go. They're going to retract the crew arm, and there were some short words about what to do in case of a fire or a launch abort system, as they're now starting to arm the launch abort system. So in case anything were to go wrong, they're going to stop that count and stop the rocket from launching. The crew would work on their emergency procedures, and so they were just talking through those procedures all on the loops.
Yeah, I think that went through the webcast. It just didn't go through on our Teams chat, so that's probably where that went through. One of the more interesting comments was that this was the time to take the last bio break. Would any of the controllers like to explain exactly what that is? Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, sure. I'll take that one. So, especially working with the International Space Station on a daily basis, you have to assist the crew, kind of like I was saying in our previous interview. If they need help with anything, you're following along, keeping track of any commanding that's going to the space station. Just basically, you are 100% focused the entire time that you're in that chair. However, the space station uses satellites in orbit to communicate with the ground, and sometimes those satellites aren't in the right position, so we have a loss of signal. So that loss of signal is basically a break time for us. We could lose signal for anywhere from 2 minutes to 15 minutes. Sometimes in the middle of the night, you might get a 30-minute one somewhere in there. but those are our bathroom breaks, breaks to go get coffee, breaks to go heat up our lunch, stuff like that. So yeah, that's a very real thing. The director of the room will tell everyone that we're about to head into something. Get prepared because you're not getting up for a while. So last chance.
All right, and that's always a good one to ask. So now instead of the how do astronauts go to the bathroom in space, we can also ask how do the controllers go to the bathroom. Hey, so Sarah, you have a question. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, muted. Jill Carroll wants to know how they select the specific launch time for each mission.
And we touched on this one earlier in the webcast, but one of the flight controllers jump in and remind folks why the time is so specific about the launch. Who wants to jump on that one?
Sure. So, with the International Space Station, it's going around the Earth at 17,500 miles per hour, and you're about to launch another rocket to it, also going 17,500 miles per hour, all while orbiting the entire globe. And so you really want to be very specific with your times because you're shooting one bullet at another bullet and hoping that they gracefully hit each other. And that's pretty difficult. So you have to organize those launch times so every bit of the orbital trajectory works out okay. It's not quite like in the movies where you can just aim your thrusters towards the space station and head towards it. You got to be really careful about it.
Is most of it mechanized now, or is there still kind of an override for a pilot to be navigating?
I think overall all of it is automated up until they get close. I know that they have overrides and pilots are trained in the event that something didn't happen. But overall, it should be as automated as possible. They actually have scheduled during this mission several times where crew's going to take over manual control just to test those capabilities as well. After all, this is a test flight. So similar with Boeing, when we had that launch earlier and they had the clock issue and it didn't make it to the space station, they were thinking that if crew were on board, they would have actually been able to take over and probably would have been able to make it to the space station regardless of the automated procedures.
When it comes to meeting up with the ISS, who does the actual maneuvering? Is it the rocket going up, or is the ISS also kind of changing where they are to allow docking?
It's actually a little bit of both. The ISS does make its own maneuvers. Sometimes, depending on which vehicle is docking where, it will sometimes do even a backflip and turn completely over so it's easier to dock. And so the ISS kind of makes its maneuver and gets in an orientation, and then that second vehicle does most of the fine maneuvering at the end.
All right, and what I want to do is I want to introduce one of our new guests here. Just logged in and joined the group here on our Coca-Cola Space Science Center webcast of the Launch America of the Crew Dragon is WGAK's Wes Carroll. Wes, how you doing?
What time are we getting started?
I was almost answered that one.
We're live. Okay.
How are you doing?
I wanted to be more. I know this is great, and I wanted to be a little more. I was actually watching you guys before I joined in. My mom came down for lunch, and I haven't been able to have lunch with my mom in forever. So I had lunch with my mom, and then jumped in, and she said, "Oh, I got time to get home before this happens." And I said, "Yeah," and that gives me time to jump in this chat. And we were watching you guys, and also watching the NASA feed. So no, glad to jump in, glad to come in and catch. And I was catching a part of the answer about their last bathroom opportunity, right?
Yes.
I didn't get to hear the full answer on it because I got interrupted, but that's what that was, right? The last chance to go to.
That was what they called a bio break.
A bio break, that's right.
It's terminology we're going to be used all the time now. I know at the Space Science Center. I'm sorry, I got to go to a bio break. Be right back.
Well, bio breaks happen often.
You guys are obviously the science people, and then on my side of things, and this won't be news to any of you because I know you guys are also most of you are sci-fi fans too. But just the fun thing that happened recently in the Star Wars world, in the Mandalorian, was the first reference in any Star Wars project to actually going to the bathroom. That happened in the Mandalorian. One of the characters mentioned going to the back tube.
Oh, I never thought about that.
That's the way they refer to it in the Star Wars world. It was like the Brady Bunch not having a toilet, right?
Right. Yeah.
So they do use the restroom in Star Wars. So
yeah. Well, that's
all I got. That's the one bit of trivia I've got, and you guys can handle everything else.
That takes the garbage compactor scene a little bit different.
Yeah.
So we do have. So the question is from our audience is what's the name of the drone ship that the first stage is landing on, and do we know the history behind that? I think we can answer the first one. I'm not quite sure we can answer the second one because I don't know if anybody knows. But if they do, yeah, Scott.
Mike, I can take a little bit of that. My understanding is that the name of the drone ship is, of course, I Still Love You. Now, why it's named that, you'd have to ask Elon Musk. That I don't know, but that's the name of it. It's a converted barge, but they refer to it as an autonomous drone ship. But it's a converted barge. I mean, it's basically a landing platform out in the ocean. And SpaceX actually has two of them. I cannot remember right now what the name of the other one is. But they do have two, and they're designed to recover these stages. Now, if possible, they like to land the stage back at the Kennedy Space Center, because obviously that saves time and money. But depending on the trajectory, sometimes they have to land the stage out in the ocean, and that would be the case today. So it does vary whether they land back at KSC or on the drone ship. But it's an innovative thing. I mean, it's amazing to me that they're able to land that stage on this platform in the middle of the ocean and successfully recover it, and to do that consistently.
Oh,
so quite an accomplishment.
Here's another question that came in while we were talking about this is we keep on saying first stage. What the heck is that?
Okay, well, the Falcon 9 rocket is a two-stage rocket. The old Saturn V was a three-stage rocket. But the SpaceX Falcon 9 is two stages. So the first stage has nine engines. And so when they recover that first stage, they get those 9 engines back. Now, the second stage only has a single Merlin engine. So the engines are called Merlin engines. And so they only lose one engine, the one that's in the second stage. But they get 9 of them back. So if you get 9 out of 10 engines back, that's some real cost savings. But it is a two-stage vehicle with 9 engines in the first stage and a single Merlin engine in the upper second stage engine. And that they do not recover. Elon Musk has looked at some ideas about trying to recover it, but I think they've more or less kind of given up on that. So the second stage is expendable, but the first stage with the majority of the engines is recoverable.
All right.
And Mike, just to tag on to that, the image that you can see of the rocket right now on the live stream, basically just to give the viewers kind of a reference, the bottom of the rocket all the way up to that first black segment on the rocket, that's your first stage. About halfway up that secondary black segment, and then from there up to what we call the trunk of the capsule, the second black part, that's the second stage. So that's the part that will not be reused. It'll just burn up in the atmosphere.
Yeah. And SpaceX kind of prides themselves in making sure that as much as the launch vehicle that can be reused is. So something that they go on there for. Dr. Cruzen.
Yeah, Mike, I got a little bit of additional info on the drone ships.
Yeah.
So Elon Musk has a favorite sci-fi author named Ian Banks, and he wrote a series of books, but the first book in the series was called The Player of Games. And in that book, there are 2 planet-sized starships, and one of those is called Just Read the Instructions, and the other one is called Of Course I Still Love You. And so the 2 SpaceX drone ship platforms at sea that capture these first stages are named after those 2 starships in the Ian Banks series.
That's awesome.
So there's obscure sci-fi referencing for you, Wes Carroll from WDAK. I know you would enjoy any kind of obscure sci-fi references we can squeeze in, and that's apparently Elon Musk likes those.
Yeah. Just to give everybody an update on the launch, you are watching the Coca-Cola Space Science Center's webcast of the Dragon Crew Demo 2 launch. We have 31 minutes left on the countdown clock. So far, everything's a go, including weather. We're all green across the board, meaning that everything is moving towards a launch. Currently, what's going on right now with the spacecraft is they are loading the propellant. Some of you may notice that there looks like steam coming out. We'll ask the group a little bit about what that is in a little bit. But our next big milestone happens at about in about 25 minutes, where Dragon will then go into its internal power. At that point, it actually begins. The spacecraft starts taking over to go on to the launch. So we're waiting for that. Everything's moving smoothly. I do have a question for the group, and it goes back to the bathroom. I'm sorry, we have brought that up, so it's now a question on for everybody's mind. We talked about the controllers and their bio break. The question is, astronauts that are now on there, anybody happen to know when their last bio break was before all this? No. I know they started to get ready at T-minus 4 hours, so it's been over 4 hours. I don't know what their time is, so I wanted to throw that out to everyone. We do have another question from Sylvia. She wants to know, what are the main goals of this flight? Why do we keep on calling it a test flight? And so if it is a test flight, what does that mean? What are those goals? Anybody want to go for that one? I like to throw
I can jump on that one if no one
go
else
ahead.
wants it. So literally, these astronauts are think about an airplane that someone is trying to fly for the very first time, right? We may have flown airplanes in the past, but now there's a brand new airplane, and you can't really fully test it until you put a pilot behind the stick and actually take it up into the air. And the interesting thing is the 2 astronauts that are on this flight were both test pilots. So that's something that they did in the Marine Corps and the Navy. They were test pilots. So now they are test piloting a new spacecraft. So nobody has been up in this spacecraft with, they don't have a stick like a jet fighter or something, but they have controls. So no human beings have flown in this particular spacecraft before. So the purpose of this mission is to simply test out this new vehicle, make sure they can get it into orbit, make sure they can dock it to the space station, make sure all of those systems are working properly. They're really going to try all of that out for the first time. They've used this ship like a drone in the past, but now it's an actual piloted vessel with human beings on the inside for the very first time. So there's not a lot of other science experiments and things on board. I shouldn't say there's zero. I think there's a couple of science experiments that are taking up all of it. But those are really kind of a secondary factor. The most important thing is simply making sure that this thing, which is a brand new vehicle to carry American astronauts to space, making sure it works. And that's why they call it a test flight, and they're testing it out today. And Wes, you have a question about that. What's your question about that?
Well, it's just related back to the question about the astronauts when they would have last had their chance to go to the bathroom, and something that I thought was interesting. This isn't bathroom related, but it relates to their timeline. We know, obviously, in the time of COVID-19, there are a lot of precautions being taken to make sure that they're safe. I thought it was interesting, and it was I was surprised to see that they were able to have direct contact with their families before they drove off in the sweet Teslas they drove off in that I actually thought were going to lift up like Back to the Future and fly over to the launch site. But it was interesting to me that they were able to interact with their families directly, because they obviously had some separation at one point before they got into the vehicle. Then they lowered the windows. And so I guess we could assume that their families have also been in some type of isolation as well.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
Just a note that now that we're getting closer to the launch time, which the launch time is at 3:22 p.m. Eastern time, or 2:22 p.m. Central, that the SpaceX engineers have noted that for the launch time of 3:22, that everything is acceptable so far. So there are a couple of things that are on the edge of being acceptable, like are just kind of barely, but they're acceptable right now. So we are, looks like we're marching down to that T-minus 0 at 3:22 p.m. Want to let you all know that if you happen to miss any portion of this, or would like to see maybe some other things that the Coca-Cola Space Science Center has, you can check us out at www.ccsssc.org and check out our Meteor Moments section that has videos, articles, activities, and more from your CCSSC family. So if we go back here to our panel, actually, Sarah, you had a good question. But we'll get there.
I had a question about what kind of fuel are they loading? I heard in one of my ears that they are loading helium. Can someone tell us a little bit about the kinds of fuel that are used on board, and then do they have to save some fuel to land upright?
Good question.
Yeah, there we go. Hi, Christian, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, and so I'm not exactly sure what the helium fuel is that you're talking about. I believe that it's a similar type of fuel to what the shuttle main engines use, not the SRBs, but what the shuttle main engines use. So it's a liquid fuel and a liquid oxidizer. And so they're allowed to, they're allowed to load some of that propellant ahead of time, and then right before launch they can load the oxidizer. So they were part of the reason they had to cancel on Wednesday is because they weren't allowed to load the oxidizer just because it burns off a lot faster. And so I believe it's hydrogen and oxygen that they're burning, liquid hydrogen, liquid oxygen. So that's the kind of fuel they're using. As to how, I believe your question was how they land upright and how they control themselves on the way down. And so it's actually pretty interesting. They have these control fins on the side of the rocket. By the way, they do save enough fuel to land, and so it's not they're keeping that amount of fuel contained as they're coming back down. They have these control fins on the side of the rocket. They look like a kind of a honeycomb structure. It's a grid fin is what it's called, and so the rockets have a set of those towards the top and towards the bottom of the rocket, and they're able to control the descent aerodynamically as they get closer to the ground. And actually, the computer that it's using to control those fins is kind of like it's like the little toy gyroscopes that you may have played with as a kid. So if you've ever had a gyroscope that you can wrap a string around it and pull it really hard, and then you set it on the table, and it just sort of seems to sit there. And if you were to tip that gyroscope, it resets itself back to the upright position. That's the same type of mechanism. You can think about it that way. It's not exactly that, but it's that same type of science is being used to help guide the rocket back to a full upright position as it comes down to land. There's also cameras on board of the rocket as well as the barge as it gets closer, and those are able to help land the rocket upright and to kind of guide it back down into its final position. I did want to say one more thing about the launch time, just because I think we kind of got. I wanted to add one thing. So those times are kind of specific, and it's actually an interesting thought. It's like why was it exactly for us in Central Time? On the last launch attempt, it was 3:33, and then today it's 2:22. And those are not just coincidental times based on orbital mechanics, although orbital mechanics do have a factor that plays in there. So they have a window that they have available based on the orbital mechanics and based on, like Matt Bartow was talking about with the bio brakes. They have satellites that are communicating with the rocket on the ground, and so they have to be able to have satellite communication with the vehicle at the exact launch time. So that's another constraint. But they have a little bit of wiggle room with the amount of propellant that they can add. And so within that time constraint window based on orbital mechanics and the positions of the communication satellites, they can pick an exact time. And I'm assuming that just based on, it makes it easier for people to remember 333, 222. And so that's just some, that's how they pick that time. So, and then I think Zach had something he wanted to add.
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to find my mute button there. So as far as the fuel is concerned, the Falcon 9 specifically uses, like you were saying, liquid oxygen as an oxidizer, and they use RP1 as their main fuel, which is a really, really refined kerosene. It's basically jet fuel grade kerosene, and so they're similar to the shuttle main engines, but instead of using liquid hydrogen, they use the RP1. So I just wanted to...
Thanks for that clarification, Zach.
Well, and let me throw another thing in too, which is the helium that they're talking about is a pressurization agent, right? So helium's inert, so it's not going to get burned up in there. So the reason they stuff helium in there is if you have a tank that's full of these cryogenic fuels, as you burn up the fuel, then you drop your pressure. But they're feeding that helium in there to make sure that the tanks stay pressurized even when the fuel is burning out. So, but because there's a high loss of helium because cold helium tends to evaporate quickly, they put that in rather late. So that's one of the reasons why that was the helium transfer.
All right, and so speaking of the fuels, we're talking about liquid helium and all that, but we're starting to see like a whole bunch of steam coming off the spacecraft. Does anybody want to talk about what that is and why we see it like that?
Yeah, so that deals a lot with what Dr. Cruzen was just saying about the cryogenics. So these fuels and oxidizers are they're very, very, very cold. They're super chilled, and especially when you're fueling the rocket, especially in very warm weather like that, you're going to have to vent some of that off. So the rocket itself is literally venting some of that pressure as they're fueling up, and then as the rocket fills up with those cryogenic fuels, it also kind of sweats with the humidity and everything around it, and so it vents these different steams and things like that. But if you look at the old videos of the Saturn V launching, the same thing would happen. They would actually have ice sheets form all the way around the vehicle, which is actually why during the shuttle program they had to put insulation around the external fuel tank to make sure that ice didn't build up on it and fall off and damage the shuttle. And so basically it all deals with the super chill temperatures of those cryogenic fuels and oxidizers. And as soon as they warm up even a little bit, they expand really rapidly, and so they have to vent some of that pressure.
So I've been asked by some other folks, they wanted to hear, Wes, you came in a little late for this one, but there were some, we were going around talking about our favorite launch experience, and I know you've had a launch experience with us, and what was your favorite part of that launch experience?
Oh, wow. Gosh, I don't even know how you break it down into a favorite part.
Right.
It's maybe it was even almost the afterglow moment, because you experience it, you see it, everything happens, and there's all that series of the light and the sound, and then you feel the pressure, and all that happens in sequential order. But then there's that moment after the fact where you're just walking around talking to other people who have just experienced it for the first time as well. And I remember, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I remember saying repeatedly, yeah, that just happened. Because it was really just sort of taking it all in, what we'd seen, and the fact that you're collectively part of a group that's experienced something that not everybody gets a chance to experience. So, but everybody should, if you get a chance to see one. Yeah. Hopefully, this is the beginning of many more launches for people to be able to see on U.S. soil. So,
and that brings us to another question that we have out there from Matt here. It says, if this launch is successful, will America no longer need to rely on Russia anymore? So to kind of give a little bit more clarity to that, ever since the Space Shuttle program ended in 2011, we've been relying on Russia to kind of help get our astronauts up to the International Space Station. So the question is, are we going to have to keep on with that reliance? And Scott or Dr. Cruzen, do you want to answer that one?
I could talk a little bit about that. I mean, the whole goal of the commercial crew program is to bring the launches back to American soil, which of course is what we're hoping for today. And not only with SpaceX, but the Boeing Starliner as well. So that way NASA has two different vehicles in case there's a problem with one. So hopefully between those two vehicles, the SpaceX Dragon and the Boeing Starliner, we will no longer be dependent on the Russian Soyuz. Now, having said that, it's my understanding is that NASA still has some flights with American astronauts on the Soyuz vehicle. I don't know exactly how many, but I do believe that there are still some seats on the Soyuz that are booked for American astronauts to use. But I'm sure that will eventually be phased out.
Honestly, and let me throw this in. It's a similar situation, right? NASA used to have its own rockets. Those rockets were built by subcontractors, but then they became NASA rockets. And NASA maintained and launched their rockets with their astronauts to space. But at some point, we stopped having our own rockets and we started paying the Russians to take us back and forth to space like a space taxi. Well, now what we're doing is we're shifting where we're not having the Russians take us to space anymore. We're having SpaceX and Boeing take us back and forth to space like a space taxi, right? So in a way, we had already entered kind of a commercial crew situation with the Russians, right? We were buying seats on somebody else's rocket, taking that transport to space. It's just that we're not going to buy it from the Russians anymore. We're going to buy it from this company that's based in the United States of America, and they're going to be launching it from Florida. So hopefully that will be the situation. We already have pre-purchased, as Scott said, some seats. And part of that is just an emergency backup in case these missions don't work that we're working on now. We still need a way to space. But hopefully at some point we'll be in a position where the taxis that we're taking are all launching from Florida.
And just a reminder that this is a test flight today. So we don't want to give up those Soyuz seats until we have at least one of these vehicles fully operational. So again, this is a test flight. And so, yes, we are still committed to have some more Soyuz flights with American astronauts until everything is certified and signed off. And again, this crew won't be coming back for at least a month, and it could be as much as 3 months. And when they come back, it'll be the first splashdown since 1975.
Yep. So just giving you an update on the launch, we are now within T-minus 13 minutes 25 seconds to launch. So it is moving down to that launch time of 3:22 p.m. Eastern. So far, everything's looking good and clear. This is actually officially farther than where we got on Wednesday in the countdown. So that's always a good thing on that. So just to give you a little bit of an idea of what's to come, at about T-minus 5 minutes, the Falcon 9 will begin to transition to internal power. What that means is it goes from it's pretty much plugged in right now to that tower, and so it's getting its power from that tower right now. And essentially what happens is they cut off that power, so that way the rocket actually starts to power itself. From there, the computers start to take over, and the everything has to happen in such a rapid succession in order for the engines to light. It's actually controlled by computers, and so the computers start kind of warming everything up from T-minus 5 minutes to T-minus 1 minute. Those 4 minutes are absolutely critical for systems to come online, for everything to happen. Those are the times that we'll really be listening into the launch audio to make sure that everything goes smoothly. From there, our next big thing is T-minus 1 minute, and everything. It depends on whether NASA shows it or not, but things start moving on the spacecraft to test out control surfaces, to test out when the engines can move a little bit to kind of help it in flight. That's called gimbaling the engines. Sometimes you get to see those kind of move around on that, and then from there, it really goes quick as just a whole bunch of stuff happens right in succession all the way T-0 at liftoff. So the launch loop gets very active as time goes on, and then they have liftoff. So far we are going on our way down. We're at T-minus 11 minutes till we go. Anybody have any thoughts on today's mission? What's today's mission being special for you?
I can take
go ahead, Cameron.
First off the back. So one thing I think is incredibly cool with this launch is we keep talking about launching Americans back from American soil and kind of working at that from our perspective instead of when the Russians want to launch. And I'm just excited because as seats were getting more expensive on the Soyuz, we were relying on them so heavily. We've been in continuous operations in space for over 20 years now. And with these rockets, they give us that ability to keep going with that, have it stay on our schedule, bring up our own science how we want. And that's just very exciting to me to have that continuous operation still going and to have that those astronauts in space be supported by us here.
All right. Just getting an update in my ear here. They have configured all of their instruments in the Dragon for the flight, and SpaceX is right now giving them a thank you and good luck and everything. So everything's going to go. Anybody else on how this message is special for them? Yeah, Scott.
I'd just like to say that, working at the Science Center, we do a lot of tours. We have a lot of students in. And sometimes one of the questions I get is, do we still fly astronauts, into space? And I say yes, but then I have to explain, that we fly, that if you're an American astronaut, you fly on a Russian rocket, on the Soyuz, which has been true since the last shuttle flight. And for me, it's going to feel really good. Then when I talk to students, I'm going to be able to tell them that, yes, we are launching from the United States, from Florida, from the Kennedy Space Center, and that, hopefully in the future you could go there and see a launch in person, live. And so to me, that's something that's really special and feel really good to be able to tell our students that, yes, astronauts are not only on the space station, but they are flying to the space station from American soil once again.
All right, and something I've been kind of requested on our social media is to go ahead and put our launch loop online. So they're come in so often. I'll keep it kind of semi-low so people can still hear what's kind of going on with the launch countdown. But we'll continue on here. We are at T-minus 7 minutes 50 seconds, so it's getting kind of close now. Weather's still looking good, so that's they had a 50-50, and if with SpaceX, I will always go with the 50% positive. the last words from Doug Hurley coming into SpaceX was, "We'll talk to you from orbit." Thank you very much. So if you have any,
I have a question.
Yeah.
I've got a question, if we can. Before, when we talked on Wednesday, as the astronauts were getting in, they signed as they were going in, which I guess is customary. Did they re-sign today, or do they use the same signatures from Wednesday?
You know, they use the same signatures from Wednesday. And I was a little bummed, actually, because I was like, aren't they going to use like a new white room? And,
well, I wasn't sure if it was like, writing a check and you got to get the date right. So
well, that's right. They just scratched out the old one, put the new one on. Actually, that'd be something interesting to see, and see all the scratch offs and everything like that. Leave a comment to the next crew. Don't turn off this. Leave the. It was like last time the AC wasn't cold enough, which. Is actually, you don't want to sit there uncomfortable, but that could be set the settings to 40, as they go into from the white room. So, all right, we're down to 5 minutes 54 seconds until launch. So here in about 50 seconds, the computer will be taking over. Good question here coming in are there any CubeSats heading up on this flight? As someone that keeps up with the CubeSats, I don't think there are any on this flight. Does anybody else know anything differently? Yeah, they're all kind of shaking their heads. I don't think there's anything on there. Their primary goal is basically to kind of get to the station, make sure they have all that together. So we're kind of listening to that flight control here. We are within 6 seconds of the computers taking over. So there we go. We're within our terminal count. And that's the Stromback retract, which is talking about the what Zach was talking about earlier. It's that thing that is right next to the capsule, or to the rocket. In the current view that you see, you'll probably see that it should be on the right hand side there. That you should see that kind of lean back a little bit there. Weather is looking great from the images we're seeing. So we have that, talking about different stages with equalizing that pressure with the fuel. All right. You can see those vents venting off that cryogenic gas, giving us those vapors. Giving us a little bit longer shot there. You can see there are some clouds off in the distance, but they look like they're pretty well off. I can definitely say it looks clearer than the last launch I was at, which is at 1:35, which was the last Atlantis flight. We're within 3 minutes 40 seconds coming up here. So they're going through their final checks. Here we are, 3 minutes 20 seconds. The important things that are coming up now are basically getting that fuel topped off and making sure everything's ready for flight. Here we go. So as you can see, that Strongback is back just a little bit than what it was before. And you can see that plug where it's kind of plugged into power. Here we are, 2 minutes, 17 seconds. Right after liftoff, we have about 58 seconds until it reaches what's called max Q, which is the maximum pressure on the vehicle. So there you see the water being released off of that. We'll talk about the water suppression system a little bit later because we're down to 1 minute 40 seconds. Everybody excited? all the heads goes yes. All right.
We should all unmute, right, and just go crazy.
Yeah, I would unmute. I think that's a good idea. Because here we go.
Genuine reactions here.
So,
really do think those suits look real slick.
Definitely do.
There's a view I'm watching inside the capsule on a muted YouTube video, and they just look great.
Yeah, that's not coming through on ours, so our audience doesn't see that. All right, Falcon 9's in startup. We're in T-minus 1 minute.
STS is armed for launch.
T-minus 50.
Dragon, SpaceX, go for launch.
Just got our go for launch.
SpaceX Dragon, we're go for launch. Let's light this candle.
Ah, yes. Wants to light the candle. Computers are now fully taking over the sequence.
Mine's lagging. I still have like 30 seconds.
Yeah, we're watching the SpaceX one.
Yeah, this is why you're supposed to watch a certain one that I gave you.
So I blame Tracy.
There we are. Now we have liftoff.
There it goes.
Nothing like some people giving away the ending. Just like a great book.
1 Alpha.
Copy, 1 Alpha.
Oh man,
That's the last time I had.
So
these
apparently
experts
this
online.
was like 30 seconds.
Don't ruin anything, John.
Gee whiz.
All right, I'll just keep as straight a face as possible. Just
Ah, cool.
All right, so we are not going to give away
Spoiler alert.
our
Breaking
landing of the
news, you're
first
going to get
stage.
John to not smile so much. Breaking news.
So they are on their way
oh man.
to the International Space Station in what was probably one of the most anticlimactic ones we've ever had. But they're on their way. It sure is a good sight to see that, and it's even better to see it with astronauts on board. They just passed
Cassidy will finally
supersonic.
have some friends.
Tucker.
Uh-oh. Someone's woken up.
1 Bravo.
Copy, 1 Bravo.
The astronauts are calling out things that I have no idea what they're talking about. It's awesome.
So that is the maximum dynamic load. It's the kind of the most dangerous part of the initial launch. We have all the structural loads on there.
Yeah.
They're going.
So we are at 1 minute and 46 seconds into flight. Our next point is going to be at about 2 minutes and 33 seconds. So that's coming up in about 40 seconds. Is going to be the main engine cutoff. So that those 9 Merlin engines in the back are going to shut off. Right quickly after that, the 2 stages will separate. SpaceX is normally very good at showing that off. So that's coming in about 13 seconds right now.
2 Alpha.
All right. So
Copy 2 Alpha.
That's main engine cutoff. I see that our feed is liking to stay with the launch tower.
That's so cool.
Okay,
They
so we
just
have
separated the stage.
It's confirmed.
While we're all watching this feed here, I'm going to attempt to switch over to a feed that may show something live views there.
Have some great views inside the cabin.
SpaceX Dragon nominal trajectory.
Nominal trajectory there, so they're heading on the correct path. Looking good there.
That's good.
Does anyone know the G load for the Falcon 9? Now that it's crew rated?
I honestly would have asked you.
That is
a little over 4 minutes, 40 seconds into the flight.
I can find out.
Flying at more than 5,600 miles
Dragon
per hour.
SpaceX nominal trajectory.
G-load
Like
is
how they call it
already
going
almost
uphill.
200 miles downrange from the
Understatement.
Kennedy Space Center. Nominal trajectory.
The G-load that Zach was
continuing.
talking about is the gravitational force on the Falcon 9. So how many times the force of gravity they're feeling?
Nominal trajectory.
How long does it take them to usually meet up with the ISS?
They'll meet up
And
tomorrow.
while they continue uphill, looks like we are getting a view of the first stage as well.
Yep, on your right screen, you can see that first stage with the grid fins deployed. It's making its way back to attempt to land on our drone ship, Of Course, I Still Love You Today. And we're just about a couple minutes away from the entry burn, and that's where 3 of the 9 Merlin engines do ignite to.
And Sarah, to answer your question, I think
help
it's a
slow the
16-hour
vehicle down
journey.
as it re-enters back into the Earth's atmosphere. And then after
Either
the
16
entry
or
burn will be the
19,
landing
from what they
burn,
said
which
the
is
other day.
just a single engine
Dragon SpaceX
burn.
nominal trajectory.
19.
And you heard
Nominal
Starting
trajectory.
chill for entry burn.
there's that call out. They are still on a nominal trajectory on Dragon. Still on second stage, and that's that
Nominal
MVAC
trajectory.
engine on second stage on your left screen.
When they keep confirming nominal trajectory, they're just saying it's doing what it's supposed to do.
It's on course.
Again,
It's
on
on
your
the
right screen
path.
is that first stage booster coming back towards our drone.
So we are currently awaiting that landing of that first stage here. It is actually going back through the atmosphere. Our second stage, our astronauts are still right on course.
Dragon copies. Nominal trajectory.
So far, what I've been able to find, it looks like they would pull a maximum of about 3 Gs.
So about 3 times the force of gravity. So if you've ever gone on a roller coaster and you get down to the bottom of the hill and it feels like you're being pushed down into the roller coaster, that's about that's the positive force. And some of you may have actually had about 3 Gs on some roller coasters. I've seen some of them that I would definitely have second guesses on going on.
The other fun way to think about it is think of 3 people that weigh about the same as you sitting on top of you.
Oh, that's a good way of thinking about it.
Yep.
And for me, that would be absolutely no.
Yeah, so if you weigh 200 pounds, you would weigh 600 pounds at 3Gs. So.
All right, for those of you watching at home, I am about ready to give you a view from the SpaceX page here. That'll give you the internal views, and we'll be able to see hopefully the landing here.
Shannon.
Copy, Shannon.
Of course, I still love you. We're about a minute away from entry burn.
If you heard the call for Shannon,
Meanwhile,
that is Shannon, Ireland. That is
continuing
one
to
of their
power
abort
Dragon
sites.
into orbit. Again, if you're keeping an eye on that timer, that's going to continue to burn until 8 minutes and 44 seconds into flight. So a little over 2 minutes from now, we'll hear the call out SECO. It'll then be a little
Stage 2 propulsion is still good.
A little over 3 minutes until Dragon physically separates from the second stage.
All right, for those of you at home, here is a view.
Dragon copies, nominal orbital insertion.
From SpaceX on the left, you see the second stage. On the right, you'll see the first stage, the camera on the first stage coming down. Those little fins that you see out are called grid fins. Engineers are a lot like astronomers in naming things. We're not very good at it. They're fins and they're made in a grid, so they're grid fins. So what you're seeing now is that actually burning the engines to slow it down through the atmosphere as it comes through. And we have nominal orbit insertion for the second stage, for the astronauts. So they are in a good normal orbit of the Earth. They'll spend some time maneuvering to get to their final orbit, with the fact that they will actually dock tomorrow. I don't have the exact time. Probably around 11 o'clock Eastern, I believe is the time frame. On the left, you're seeing some views from inside the astronauts, inside the Dragon, with the astronauts being able to look at their displays. You'll see on the
sorry, is that a toy Dragon that's floating around inside the cockpit?
Probably
is.
Yes, that is their G indicator.
I would like to point out, Zach, that Dragon did not have wings.
Maybe it's a dinosaur.
Just saying.
You don't need
just
That makes
saying.
it a dinosaur.
Maybe it is a dinosaur. That's what I was.
It took me a second to process it because I didn't see wings, and I thought, oh, it's a dinosaur in there, and then I said, wait a minute, that's got to be a dragon.
It's the coloring of the scales. It's the coloring of the scales that give it away as a dragon. Have you ever seen a holographic dinosaur?
Have you ever seen a non-holographic dinosaur, John?
I have.
So we have confirmation.
Zach
that
draws them all the time. I've never seen Zach draw a holographic dinosaur.
All right,
Just
ladies
saying.
and gentlemen, here we are.
Step up your game, Zach.
Don't make me do it, you guys. Here we are. We are awaiting for the launch. Of course, I still love you. Loss of signal has just shown up. But that happens. There it is. Landed on the drone ship is the first stage. As you can see, it is not quite as clean as it was on the way up. A little dirtied right now with having to go through all that rocket launch. So what we're waiting on now is Dragon separation. So we have separated now from the second stage. The astronauts,
separation confirmed.
The astronauts are excited, and you should see coming up in just a few moments should be a screen showing that separation.
Dragon SpaceX, with that separation call, we have a few words for you from our Falcon 9 team.
So here comes the Falcon 9 team.
Dragon, Chief Engineer on Dragon to Ground. Bob Doug, on behalf of the entire launch team, thanks for flying with Falcon 9 today. We hope you enjoyed the ride and wish you a great mission.
SpaceX giving their best captain.
Congratulations to you and the F9 team for the first human ride for Falcon 9, and it was incredible. Appreciate all the hard work, and thanks for the great ride to space.
All right.
That'll be all.
Wow, and like proud of you guys and the rest of the team. Thank you so much for what you've done for us today, putting America back into low Earth orbit from the Florida coast.
All right, with that, we are going to come to a close with our Coca-Cola Space Science Center webcast here of Launch America, as the astronauts have been successfully launched into space. They will rendezvous again with the ISS sometime tomorrow. I want to thank our audiences. Thank our audience. Thank you for being here. I also want to thank our panel of Matt Bartow, Scott Norman, Sarah Newpin, Zach Coker, Karen McCarty, Cheryl Coker, Wes Carroll, John Hood, and Dr. Sean Cruzen for joining us. I will ask our panel to stay just a little bit afterwards because we have some other folks that want to say hello to you. But other than that, this is Michael Johnson saying for the Coca-Cola Space Science Center, thank you for watching us, and we hope that you come back for our next one. Stay tuned to our webpage and Facebook in order to find out when our next webcast is. And for Michael Johnson and the Coca-Cola Space Science Center,